cannot stop here! The frost awaits us all!
You think medieval winters were cozy seats with fireplaces and warm meat? Wrong. Winter in medieval Europe was a death sentence. It killed more people than wars, more than plagues, more than anything else. One brutal winter could destroy an entire kingdom. An army could freeze to death without fighting a single battle. Today, I'm showing you the medieval winter disasters that changed history forever. Catastrophes so devastating that Europe never fully recovered. This isn't the romantic medieval fantasy you've been sold. This is survival horror, and it's all true. Meet Robert, a 34-year-old English farmer living through the spring of 1315 in Yorkshire. Robert is about to experience something that will kill millions across Europe over the next 7 years. It starts with rain. Not normal rain, endless cold, torrential rain that never stops. For weeks, then months, water pours from the sky like the world is drowning. This is the beginning of the Great Famine, the worst food crisis medieval Europe ever faced. And Robert has no idea that his entire world is about to collapse. Spring 1315 should have been planting season. Instead, Robert's fields are underwater swamps. The seeds he plants don't sprout, they rot in cold mud. This isn't just bad weather. This is a complete breakdown of the natural cycle that medieval society depends on for survival. The rain doesn't stop. April becomes May. May becomes June. Still raining. The crops that somehow manage to grow are stunted, diseased, covered in fungus. Robert watches his wheat turn black with mold while still in the ground. What Robert doesn't know is that this is the beginning of the Little Ice Age, a centuries-long period when European temperatures dropped dramatically. But in 1315, all he knows is that spring never came. Summer never brought sunshine, and his family is going to starve. The psychological impact is crushing. Every gray morning, water still pouring from the sky. Hope dies a little more. Prayers don't work. God seems to have abandoned Europe. The familiar world is ending. Then comes the secondary disaster nobody saw coming, the salt crisis. Medieval people need salt desperately to preserve meat for winter. Salt comes from evaporating seawater in the sun. But there's no sun, just endless rain and clouds. Salt production stops completely. Prices skyrocket. Even if Robert could slaughter a pig, he couldn't preserve the meat. Without salt, everything rots. No protein reserves for winter, nothing. The rain has destroyed both food production and food preservation. It's a perfect storm of catastrophe. Fall 1315 arrives. Harvest time. Robert's fields yield almost nothing. The wheat that survived is damp, moldy, already rotting. His barns that should feed his family all winter remain nearly empty. Across northern Europe, England, France, Germany, Poland, Scandinavia, the same disaster is unfolding. Millions of people facing winter with no food. This is when Robert realizes the truth. This winter, his family might not survive. Winter 1315 to 1316 becomes known as the Great Famine. Food prices explode overnight. Wheat costs 8 times normal. Oats and rye, 6 times. For a peasant family like Robert's, bread, their main food source, becomes impossible to afford. Robert sells his tools, his extra clothes, even his land, just to buy a few loaves that last 3 days. Then what? More desperate bargaining, more starvation. In the markets, violence erupts. People fight over scraps of bread. Merchants guard their warehouses with weapons. Anyone with food becomes a target. Society is collapsing. The normal rules don't apply anymore. Mothers steal bread from other children to feed their own. Neighbors who lived peacefully for generations now eye each other with suspicion and hatred. Trust evaporates. Community bonds break. It's every family for itself. Robert faces the most terrible decision of his life, feeding his seed grain. That grain is supposed to be planted in spring to grow next year's crop. Eating it means no harvest next year either. It's choosing between death now or death later. But Robert's children are crying from hunger. His wife is so weak she can barely stand. What choice does he have? He eats the seed grain. So does every other desperate farmer across Europe. They're all condemning themselves to another year of famine, but they can't think about next year when they're dying today. When the grain runs out, Robert's family eats things that aren't food. Tree bark boiled into a gray sludge, roots dug from frozen ground, acorns ground into paste, moss scraped from trees, leather from old shoes, soaked in water until it's soft enough to chew. These aren't meals, they're desperate attempts to fill stomachs with anything, even if it has no nutrition. People are eating to feel full, not to survive. It doesn't work. They're still starving, just more slowly. The chronicles from this period report something worse: cannibalism, when hunger drives people completely mad. All moral boundaries collapse. Some people eat the dead, others don't wait for death. This is what happens when civilization breaks down completely. Robert never crosses that line, but he hears the rumors. He sees the empty, dead look in other people's eyes. He knows some of his neighbors have done unspeakable things. The famine has turned humans into something less than human. Authorities try to help but fail completely. Kings issue decrees fixing bread prices. Merchants ignore them and hide their grain, waiting for prices to rise even higher. Where grain stores are found, riots break out. Starving mobs storm warehouses. Guards open city granaries and distribute food to prevent violence. It lasts 3 days. Then the warehouses are empty again, and the hunger returns worse than before. The roads become deadly. Desperate peasants attack merchants' carts, stealing whatever food they're transporting. Monasteries, which usually shelter the poor, are robbed by starving crowds. Even royal supply convoys are ambushed. Entire regions descend into banditry and chaos. The church offers prayers, but no real help. Monastery grain stores empty quickly. Abbots beg kings for assistance, but the kings have nothing to give. Everyone is starving together. This isn't a local famine that neighboring regions can help with. All of Northern Europe is suffering simultaneously. From Ireland to Poland, from Norway to the Alps, trade routes are empty. There's nothing to trade. Rich cities like Bruges and Cologne that normally overflow with food are facing shortages. Ships sit idle in harbors. Europe has frozen economically and socially. Constant malnutrition destroys people's strength. Men can't chop firewood. Women can't knead bread dough. Children wander streets begging for food that doesn't exist. Disease spreads like wildfire through weakened populations. Dysentery kills entire families. Bodies pile up faster than they can be buried. The living are too weak to dig graves for the dead. It's a vicious cycle of death. Hunger causes weakness. Weakness prevents work. Without work, there's no food production. The cycle accelerates. Spring 1316 arrives, but nobody has strength to work the fields. There's no seed grain left anyway, it was all eaten during winter. The planting season fails again. Another year of famine is guaranteed. This catastrophe will last 7 years and kill between 10 to 25% of Northern Europe's population. Robert's family survives, barely, but his youngest child and his mother don't. They die of starvation and disease, like millions of others now. Let me tell you about an even worse winter, one that historians call the Great Winter, the winter of 1407 to 1408. This winter was marked by unprecedented cold. Temperatures so extreme that rivers that never freeze became solid ice roads. The Thames in London froze completely solid. The Seine in Paris became an ice highway. People walked across rivers that normally killed anyone who fell in. It sounds magical, but it was apocalyptic. Frozen rivers meant economic collapse. Rivers were medieval. Europe's highways boats transported grain, wine, firewood, all essential goods. When rivers froze, all trade stopped instantly. Cities were blockaded by ice. Food supplies couldn't arrive. Firewood couldn't be delivered. Everything just stopped. Watermills froze solid. Mills powered by river water ground grain into flour. When the mill wheels froze, grain grinding stopped. People had wheat but couldn't turn it into bread. The food crisis deepened, even though there was technically food available. Land travel became impossible too. Roads that were already terrible became ice tracks that destroyed carts and killed horses. Draft animals couldn't pull loads on ice. Entire regions became completely isolated. Villages cut off by snow and ice were left to survive or die on their own. No help was coming. Communication between cities ceased. Messages sent in November arrived in April. The world shrank to whatever you could see from your door. Fuel prices exploded. Firewood became worth more than gold. People chopped down fruit trees, garden trees, even parts of their own homes to burn for warmth. Keeping the fire alive became more important than eating. In medieval stone castles, those supposedly secure fortresses, people froze. Huge halls were impossible to heat. Lords and ladies, wrapped in every fur they owned, still shivered by fires that provided almost no heat. Stone walls held the cold like ice. Castles were frozen tombs for the wealthy. Peasant cottages were death traps, made of wood and clay with gaps in the walls. They offered almost no protection from brutal cold. Families huddled together in beds, sharing body heat, trying not to freeze during the night. Many didn't make it. People went to sleep and never woke up. Hypothermia took them silently. In the morning, families would find their elderly or their children frozen solid in their beds. Fuel became the difference between life and death. Gathering firewood was strictly controlled. Peasants could only collect dead branches from the forest floor. Cutting living trees, especially on lord's land, was severely punished. But when you're freezing to death, you take risks. Illegal tree cutting became widespread despite brutal penalties. People chose possible punishment over certain death. Some were caught and punished: fines, beatings, imprisonment. Others froze, waiting for permission to gather wood legally. In areas without forests, people burned peat-compressed plant material cut from bogs and dried. Peat extraction was brutal work, cutting heavy, wet blocks of peat, stacking them to dry all summer. If summer was wet, peat didn't dry, and people had no fuel for winter. Burning peat was miserable anyway. It produced less heat than wood and filled homes with acrid, choking smoke. People coughed constantly, eyes streaming, lungs damaged. But it was burn peat or freeze. The only real protection against cold was wool. Medieval people understood this completely. Wool retains heat even when wet, critical in Europe's damp climate. Cotton or linen clothing, when wet, sucks heat from your body and kills you. Wool keeps you warm. People dressed in layers, linen shirt against skin, multiple wool tunics over that, heavy wool cloak on top. The cloak was vital. It protected from wind and rain and doubled as a blanket at night. Poor people used cloaks as their only blanket. Wool quality showed your social status. Peasants wore coarse, undyed, scratchy wool that itched constantly but kept them alive. The wealthy wore fine, soft, dyed wool that was both warm and comfortable. Protecting feet and hands was crucial. Wool stockings wrapped around feet, leather shoes that got wet immediately. People stuffed dry grass or moss inside shoes as makeshift insulation. Mittens were luxury items most couldn't afford. Peasants, working outside, developed severe frostbite on their hands regularly. If civilians suffered in their homes, armies caught outside during winter faced absolute catastrophe. Winter military campaigns were rare and desperate. Most commanders disbanded troops until spring because keeping an army alive in winter was nearly impossible. An army needs enormous amounts of food. In summer, soldiers could forage, steal from local villages. In winter, the land was frozen and dead, nothing to steal. This meant the army had to carry all provisions, thousands of wagons stretching for miles, moving at crawling pace. Worse, armies needed fodder for horses and oxen. No grass under snow meant carrying hay and oats cargo that often exceeded soldiers' food supplies. Soldiers froze in inadequate clothing. Their shoes fell apart. Clothes got wet and never dried. Morale collapsed. Discipline failed. Soldiers cared more about finding firewood than following orders. Desertion became epidemic. Entire armies melted away as soldiers fled for home. Many armies were destroyed by winter without ever fighting. Logistical collapse, cold, starvation. These killed more soldiers than enemy weapons. Commanders who launched winter campaigns often lost entire armies to the elements. Winter was a more effective enemy than any human force. It forced even the most powerful kings to accept their powerlessness against nature. Winter meant isolation, complete separation. Medieval roads were dirt tracks with no maintenance. Autumn rain turned them to mud. Winter frost turned mud to bumpy ice. Carts broke. Horses fell. Travelers died. Summer trade routes became death traps. Nobody traveled unless absolutely desperate. Cities dependent on trade and food shipments faced starvation when roads closed. Grain, salt, meat, nothing arrived. Food reserves dwindled. Prices soared. People starved in cities while food sat, rotting in distant warehouses, unreachable due to impassable roads. Trade stopped completely. Merchants couldn't transport goods. Craftsmen couldn't sell products. The economy froze as solidly as the rivers. Rich people who had stocked up in autumn survived. Poor people starved. Information flow ceased too. Messengers couldn't travel. Letters from kings, orders from lords, news from other regions all stuck on impassable roads. Messages sent in winter arrived in spring when they no longer mattered. Kingdoms operated in ignorance, not knowing what was happening elsewhere. Remote villages became completely cut off for 3 to 4 months. No one came in, no one went out. Snow buried paths. The world shrank to your house and barn. Conversations were only about survival, food, fuel, livestock, health. Long-term planning was impossible. You just tried to survive until tomorrow. This isolation crushed people psychologically. Loneliness, fear, uncertainty. Winter was mental torture as much as physical suffering. The Great Famine and Great Winter left permanent scars on Europe. Villages were abandoned forever. Archaeologists still find them today. Vast farmlands were abandoned and overgrew with forest. It took generations to recover agricultural production. Feudal lords lost income as peasant populations collapsed. Society changed. Survivors switched from wheat to hardier crops, rye, oats, barley that could survive bad weather. Some regions abandoned farming for sheep herding. Pastures were more reliable than crops. Trust in authorities evaporated. Neither prayers nor royal decrees stopped the famine. This sowed seeds of doubt that later exploded in the Reformation and peasant revolts. Fear of famine became embedded in European culture and folklore. The idea that nature was hostile and must be controlled took root. These disasters were harsh teachers. They forced European society to adapt, innovate, seek new technologies. They showed the limits of medieval civilization and triggered transformation toward the modern era. Winter in the Middle Ages wasn't a season, it was an annual test of survival, sometimes a full-scale catastrophe. These forgotten disasters killed as many people as wars and changed history just as much. They revealed human vulnerability but also our incredible ability to adapt. The search for new fuels, agricultural changes, better clothing, all responses to nature's challenge. This history reminds us how fragile civilization is and how valuable simple things truly are. Bread, warmth, safety. If this changed how you see medieval history, hit that subscribe button. Next video drops in 4 days. We're covering the Black Death's forgotten winter outbreak that historians don't talk about. The plague wasn't just a summer disease, and what happened in winter was even worse. You won't believe this. See you then.